Hi guys, welcome back to lesson 29-2, day 2, adding and subtracting rational expressions. Today we're going to use what we learned in our last video about finding an LCD to add and subtract rational expressions. So we are going to identify excluded values and add and subtract rational expressions, okay, of unlike denominators. So you will need the backside of your lesson 29-2 note sheet, which is posted on Google Classroom, and you'll want a pen or a pencil and your calculator. So here's an example of adding and subtracting with unlike denominators. So you have, just like when we did it with numbers the other day in class, kind of what we did here, we would just take 3 and multiply that by this side and take 8 and multiply it by this side, right? And whatever you do to the bottom, you do to the top. So we're going to use that idea here when we have rational expressions. All right, so first thing you need to do is factor the denominators. Okay, so that's what they did here. They factored that one. They took out a GCF of x, and they were left with x minus 2. Okay, so then again, just like yesterday, you want to find the factors that are in common, and that becomes part of your LCD. And then find the one that's not in common, or ones that are not in common, and that becomes part of your LCD. So now they know that the least common denominator is this x times x minus 2. Okay. Then what you have to do, step 3, this is the part where people get a little tricked up. You need to multiply the numerator and denominator of each term by the missing factors of the least common denominator. So if we look back up, this one, use yellow here, this term is missing the x, so we have to multiply the numerator and the denominator by that x. Okay, so that's what they did in step 3. And then we have 2x minus 3 in the numerator, and then the denominator stays the exact same, x times x minus 2. Okay, it's the LCD. Then we also need to state the restrictions on x. Okay, so whatever your LCD is, you're going to set those terms equal to 0. So they set x equal to 0, and so they know x cannot equal 0. And they set x minus 2 equal to 0, so they know x cannot equal 2. So that is how you find your restrictions. Okay, let's go ahead and work through one together. Okay, so step 1 is to factor your denominators. So this one's already factored. We're good to go. But this one needs to be factored. We can take out a GCF of x, and we're left with x minus 3. Okay, so now if we go ahead and rewrite this as 2 over x minus 3 over x times x minus 3. Okay, remember you want to write your LCD, and to come up with that, you take what's in common. So both of these have an x, so that's going to become part of your LCD. And then you also take, what is not in common, so this x minus 3, and that becomes part of your LCD. And that is how we find that. That is kind of like your, well, I guess second step, because your first step is factoring the denominators. Okay, so now that we know what our LCD is, we're going to go ahead and whatever is missing from the denominator. So this one has the whole thing, x times x minus 3. So we're not going to multiply that by anything. We're just going to rewrite it exactly as is. But this one is missing the x minus 3. So that's how we know we have to multiply by that on the top and bottom. So I'm going to multiply it by the bottom and the top. And on top, we're going to have to distribute that. So 2 times x is 2x, and 2 times negative 3 is negative 6. And then on the bottom, we're just going to leave it as x times x minus 3. You could distribute, but we want it to match up exactly to what we have in the other fraction. okay? Because now notice we have these common denominators, which is what we wanted, okay? So now your next step is to just in the numerator, so remember your denominator always stays the same now. We're not going to change that. And now we're just going to 2x minus, there's no other x values, so we're going to write that as 2x. And then negative 6 minus 3 is going to be negative 6 minus 3 is negative 9. Okay. Now, the only things we have left to do are our restrictions. And you can do that off to the side if you want. But you're going to take your common denominator and set those equal to 0. So we would set x equal to 0, and we would set the x minus 3 equals 0. So this means x cannot equal 0. And if we add the 3 over, x cannot equal 3. So that becomes part of my answer. Cannot equal 0 or 3. And this would be your final answer. So 2x minus 9 over x times x minus 3, where x cannot equal 0 or 3. Okay. So you have to be careful. You have to follow the 4 steps. Step 1, factor the denominators. Step 2, find the LCD. Step 2, find what's missing from each fraction in the LCD and multiply by that in the numerator and denominator. And then step 4, you just simplify. Okay, and I guess step 5 then would be your restrictions. Okay, let's try another. Okay, be careful with this one. This one has 3 fractions, okay, or 3 rational expressions. So first step, factor the denominators. This one's good. This one's good. Those are both factored. This one needs to be factored, so we're going to do the big X. What 2 numbers multiply to negative 6 that add to negative 5? And that should be a positive 6. Sorry. Yeah. A negative 6 and a positive 1. Okay. So we would write that as x minus 6 and x plus 1. So now let's go ahead and look at this one. So what do they have in common? So we have an x plus 1 and an x plus 1. Those are in common of our denominators. So we're going to write that as one of our, or part of our LCD. But then we also have this x minus 6 and this x minus 6. So that's also part of your least common denominator. And then we've used up all the denominators, so that has to be your entire LCD. Okay? Now, sometimes what I like to do, especially when there are 3 like this, is I just like to write that all in. So we know the denominator has to be x plus 1 times x minus 6 for all of these. And then even, the solution has to have that as well. So we could put equals blank over x plus 1 times x minus 6. Okay, now let's go back and figure out what these numerators should look like. So this technically, this last one, was all there already. So we already have the whole LCD, so this one's going to stay exactly the same. We don't have to do anything to this numerator. Okay, but this one is missing the x plus 1. So since it's missing the x plus 1 and we added that in the bottom, we also need to multiply that by that on the top. Okay? And don't go canceling. I know people see that and they like to do that. Do not do that. That's the whole point of getting this common denominator. Okay? So we have to multiply by that. All right, then same idea in this last one. we just have the x plus 1, so we're missing the x minus 6. So we need to multiply the numerator 1 times this x minus 6 as well. So that's what I'm going to do in this next step first. I'm just going to do my distributing before I do my adding. So this is going to be 1 times x is x, 1 times negative 6. And then I'm going to do x times x, which is x squared, and x times 1, which is x. And then I'm going to do minus 5x. And I'm actually going to distribute this minus. So that's going to be a plus 2. Okay. Now what we need to do, and I didn't go ahead and write in all of the denominators again, but they do stay there. Oops. Okay. Now what we need to do is just combine like terms. So we have an x squared, positive x squared, that's going to come here. That's the only one like that. Then we have x plus x minus 5x. So x plus x is 2x, minus 5x is negative 3x. And then we have this negative 6 plus 2, which would be negative 4. Okay. All right. And so that's good to go. And then the only other thing we need are our restrictions. So that would be setting these equal to 0. So x plus 1 equals 0 is going to mean x cannot equal negative 1. And x minus 6 equals 0 is going to mean x cannot equal positive 6. So we would say, comma, x cannot equal negative 1 or positive 6. And that would be your final answer. Okay. So it's a lot of work, but you got to follow the steps and you guys can handle it. All you're doing is factoring the denominators, finding a lowest common denominator, and then making sure that whatever you multiply by on the bottom to get that lowest common denominator, you multiply by on the top, and then you just simplify and make sure you come up with your restrictions. Okay? So go ahead and try this one out. Okay, follow the 4 steps to simplify the expression and identify any restrictions on x, and I will leave the answer. Okay, if you have any questions, let me know. Other than that, have a wonderful day, and we'll go over some of these tomorrow. Bye-bye.